Did you hear? Eleanor Beaumont refused Park Jun-seo again. Refused him? The man is worth $50 billion. Refused him. Twice. Seoul had never seen anything like it. The whispers traveled from the marble corridors of Park Global Holdings all the way to the rooftop restaurants of Gangnam, passing through boardrooms and beauty parlors and private clubs where people who mattered gathered to talk about people who mattered more. Nobody refused Park Jun-seo. The man had built an empire so vast that entire city blocks answered to his name. Politicians took his calls on the first ring. Banks restructured their policies around his preferences. Women, stunning, accomplished, carefully presented women, had spent years positioning themselves within his orbit, hoping for exactly the kind of attention he was now directing, freely and without apology, toward a 70-year-old black American grandmother named Eleanor Jean Beaumont. But what Seoul didn't know, what the whispers hadn't yet carried, was what happened earlier that evening, in the private dining room of Changwon House, Seoul's most exclusive restaurant, where the lighting was deliberately low and the food arrived in courses so elegant they felt like art. Jun-seo had looked at Eleanor across the table. Not the way men usually looked at her, with calculated respect, or professional admiration, or that particular brand of surprise that crossed people's faces when they realized exactly how sharp she was. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has already decided belongs to him. Quietly. Completely. Without performance. He set down his glass. "Marry me, Eleanor." It wasn't a question. It wasn't decorated with romance or softened with uncertainty. It landed on the table between them like a document he expected her to sign. Eleanor Jean Beaumont did not startle. She did not blush. She did not look around the room to confirm she had heard correctly. She picked up her wine glass, took one slow and considered sip, and then she laughed. It was a beautiful laugh, low and genuine and completely unbothered, the kind of laugh that belonged to a woman who had lived enough life to find almost everything either amusing or beneath her attention. "Not in this lifetime, Jun-seo," she said. The room went silent. 3 members of staff who had been moving discreetly along the periphery stopped moving entirely. Jun-seo's personal assistant, seated at the far end of the room with a tablet he was no longer looking at, forgot to breathe. Nobody had ever said no to Park Jun-seo. Until Eleanor. She finished her wine, touched the corner of her mouth with her napkin, folded it precisely and set it beside her plate. Then she stood, smoothed the front of her midnight blue dress, and said goodnight with the same energy she might use to close a meeting that had run slightly over schedule. Not cruel. Not dramatic. Simply done. Jun-seo watched her leave. He did not call after her. He did not reach for his phone. He sat very still in that low light, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he smiled. 6 weeks earlier, Eleanor Jean Beaumont had been exactly where she always was at 6:45 on a Tuesday morning, seated at the head of the long mahogany table in the Atlanta headquarters of Beaumont Real Estate, a company she had built across 4 decades into the largest black-owned real estate empire in the United States. Her coffee was black, her reading glasses were on, and the 12 people seated around the table were already slightly afraid of her, which was exactly as she preferred it. "Walk me through Seoul again," she said. Her head of acquisitions, a precise young woman named Dana, pulled up the projection. "The Mapo District parcel, ma'am. 43 acres of undeveloped land sitting at the convergence of 3 future infrastructure corridors. Korean government has greenlit residential and commercial development. Projected value appreciation over 5 years is extraordinary, conservative estimates put it at 300%. And the owner?" Dana hesitated just long enough for Eleanor to notice. "Park Global Holdings. Jun-seo Park is the sole decision-maker." The room adjusted itself almost imperceptibly. Someone shifted in their chair. Someone else recapped a pen they hadn't been using. Eleanor looked at the projection for a long moment. Has anyone approached him before? 2 firms. Both American. Both were declined within 24 hours. Eleanor took a sip of her coffee. "Book me a flight to Seoul. I'll go myself." Dana blinked. You, personally? Is there an echo in here? Eleanor said it pleasantly. Dana booked the flight before the meeting was over. Eleanor's Atlanta home sat on 4 acres in Buckhead, behind iron gates and a long driveway lined with magnolias that her late husband Robert had insisted on planting the year they bought the property. He said magnolias were the most honest tree, they bloomed spectacularly and made no apology for it. Eleanor had thought that was the most Robert thing he had ever said. She still thought about it sometimes, usually in the early mornings when the light came through the bedroom windows at an angle that reminded her of him. Robert Beaumont had been gone 8 years. 8 years of mornings without him, of board meetings he should have been in, of milestones he should have witnessed. Their son Marcus had gotten married 4 years ago and spent the entire reception looking at the door as though his father might still walk through it. Their daughter Simone, who lived in London with her husband David and their daughter Zoe, called every Sunday without fail, and every Sunday Eleanor could hear, underneath all the ordinary conversation, the same quiet worry. Are you lonely, Mama? Are you really okay? Eleanor was okay. She was certain of it. She had her work, her health, her grandchild, her home, her gardens, and her memories. She had built a life of such deliberate fullness that loneliness rarely found a foothold. And on the occasions it did, on the evenings when the house was too quiet and the other side of the bed felt like a geography she no longer had the language for, Eleanor dealt with it the way she dealt with everything. She got up, made tea, and found something useful to do. She was not looking for anyone. She was not open to anyone. That chapter had been written by the only man she had ever loved, and it had ended, and it had been the most important story of her life, and she was content, genuinely, structurally content, to let it remain complete. She packed for Seoul with this certainty sitting in her chest like bedrock. Park Jun-seo did not typically attend initial acquisition meetings. That was what his team was for, a formidable collection of lawyers, analysts, and negotiators who had spent years learning exactly how to dismantle the optimism of incoming investors. He reviewed reports. He made final decisions. He did not sit across tables from people who wanted things from him and watch them make their case. But his chief of staff, a man named Hyun who had worked for him for 11 years and had learned to recognize the particular quality of Jun-seo's silences, had flagged this meeting differently. It's Eleanor Beaumont, Hyun had said, setting the file on the desk. She's coming herself. Jun-seo had looked up from what he was reading. The Beaumont real estate Eleanor Beaumont? Yes, sir. He'd read the file that evening. Eleanor Jean Beaumont, 70 years old. Widow. Mother of 2. Grandmother of 1. Founder and chief executive of Beaumont Real Estate, a company with a portfolio valued at $4.2 billion, built from a single property purchase in Atlanta in 1981 when she and her husband had scraped together every dollar they had and bet on a neighborhood everyone else had written off. She had been right. She had been right about 17 neighborhoods after that. She had expanded into commercial real estate in the 90s, into luxury development in the 2000s, into international markets in the last decade. She gave a commencement address at Howard University 3 years ago that had been viewed 11 million times online. Jun-seo read the file twice. Then he rearranged his schedule and decided he would attend the meeting himself. Eleanor walked into Park Global Holdings at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday morning wearing a bone-white suit that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, her silver-streaked locks pinned in an immaculate crown, her pearls at her throat and her reading glasses folded in her breast pocket. She walked the way she always walked, unhurried, upright, as though the ground had been expecting her. Jun-seo was already in the boardroom when she entered. He stood when she came in, which surprised her team and visibly surprised his. He extended his hand. Mrs. Beaumont. I'm Jun-seo Park. Eleanor shook it. His grip was firm. So was hers. I know who you are, she said. Thank you for making time. She sat. Her team sat. His team sat. And the meeting began. Eleanor did not ease into it. She did not spend time on pleasantries or positioning. She laid out her proposal with the clean, undecorated confidence of someone who had done this more times than she could count and had stopped being nervous about it somewhere around 1994. The Maple parcel. Beaumont's vision for it. The numbers, the projections, the community development framework she intended to build around it, because Eleanor had learned long ago that the most profitable real estate was the kind that made the neighborhood around it worth more too. June SEO listened. He did not look at his team. He did not look at his phone. He looked at her, at the way she moved through her own presentation with complete authority, at the way she paused deliberately when making a point she wanted to land, at the way she answered the one technical question his chief financial officer raised with a precision that made the CFO sit back slightly in his chair. When she finished, June SEO was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. Eleanor did not react. No to which element? No to the sale. The room adjusted. Dana, seated beside Eleanor, reached for her folder. Eleanor did not reach for anything. She looked at June SEO with an expression of complete composure and said, "Tell me why." It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question, asked by someone who collected information the way other people collected grievances. June SEO studied her for just a moment. "That land is central to a development vision I've held for 6 years. Selling it would be removing a cornerstone." "Then don't sell it," Eleanor said. "Partner with me instead." The room went very still. June SEO tilted his head slightly, a movement so small most people in the room missed it entirely. "That's not something I do." "Neither is attending initial acquisition meetings," Eleanor said. "And yet here you are." She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds, then opened her folder and slid a single document across the table toward him. "I didn't come with only one option, Mr. Park. Take a look at that before you decide anything." June SEO looked at the document. Then he looked at her. Then, with the kind of deliberateness that suggested he was doing something he hadn't planned to do, he picked it up and read it. The meeting ran 40 minutes over schedule. When Eleanor finally stood to leave, June SEO stood again. His team looked at each other. "I'll have my people review this," he said. "Of course," Eleanor said. She shook his hand again. Same grip. Same composure. "It was a pleasure, Mr. Park." She walked out of Park Global Holdings and into the Seoul afternoon, and she thought about the meeting the way she thought about all her meetings, analytically, strategically, without sentiment. She thought about the numbers and the terms and the leverage points and what his hesitation meant and how she might address it. She did not think about the way he had stood when she entered. She did not think about the quality of his attention, or the fact that in 40 years of boardrooms she could count on one hand the number of people who had listened to her the way he just had, not waiting for her to finish, but actually hearing every word. She didn't think about any of that. She went back to her hotel, ordered room service, called Simone, and went to sleep at 10 o'clock. June SEO sat in his empty boardroom for 11 minutes after she left. Hyun, who had learned when to be invisible, was invisible. Then June SEO picked up the document Eleanor had left, read it one more time, set it down and said, "Get me everything else there is to know about Eleanor Beaumont." Hyun typed a note into his tablet. "Everything, sir." "Everything," June SEO said. He stood, straightened his jacket and walked to the window that overlooked Seoul spreading endlessly below him, a city he had shaped in ways most people would never trace back to him. He stood there for a long time. Outside, somewhere in this city, Eleanor Jean Beaumont was probably already thinking about something else entirely. That, June SEO thought, was going to change. The report Hyun compiled was thorough in the way that only 11 years of understanding June SEO's standards could produce. It arrived on his desk the following morning, not a digital file but a printed document, because June SEO had never trusted important information to screens he couldn't hold. He read it over breakfast, which he took alone as he always did, at the small table beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse that looked out over the Han River in the early light. Eleanor Jean Beaumont was born in Birmingham, Alabama, the second of 4 children of a schoolteacher father and a seamstress mother who between them had modeled a particular kind of dignity that did not require wealth to sustain itself. She had studied business at Howard University on a partial scholarship, supplementing her finances with 2 part-time jobs she never mentioned in interviews because she didn't consider struggle to be the most interesting part of her story. She had met Robert Beaumont in her junior year. He was studying architecture, she was studying him, she would say in later interviews with the relaxed humor of someone revisiting a memory so good it had never lost its warmth. They married at 24. Marcus came at 25. Simone at 28. The first property came at 31, that single purchase in an Atlanta neighborhood everyone else had abandoned, financed by every saved dollar they had and a bank loan that Robert said kept him up at night for 6 months straight. Eleanor slept fine. She had looked at the numbers, walked the streets, spoken to the people who still lived there, and made her decision. She was right. She was right about so many things across so many years that eventually people stopped being surprised by it and simply accepted it as a feature of Eleanor Beaumont the way you accepted weather, not something to question, simply something to account for. Robert died of a heart attack 8 years ago, at a charity dinner, surrounded by people who admired him. Eleanor had been seated beside him. She had held his hand in the ambulance and spoken to him quietly the entire way to the hospital, and the paramedic who was present said later that he had never seen anyone so composed in that situation, and he meant it as admiration, though he also suspected that composure was the only thing keeping her from coming apart entirely. She had not remarried. She had not, as far as any reporting could determine, so much as dated. She had returned to work with an intensity that her team described carefully, choosing words that conveyed dedication without suggesting grief, though everyone understood it was both. June SEO set the report down. He looked out at the Han River, silver and wide in the morning light. He had built everything he had by understanding value, real value, not surface value, not the value assigned by consensus or convention but the deeper, structural worth of a thing that would still be standing long after trends had shifted and markets had corrected. He understood, sitting at that table with the report before him and the river beyond the glass, that Eleanor Beaumont was the most valuable person he had encountered in a very long time. Not her portfolio. Not her company. Her, the particular combination of intelligence and discipline and warmth and steel that had produced both the empire and the woman simultaneously, inseparable from each other. He had spent 59 years building his own life with similar single-mindedness. He had told himself, on the rare occasions he considered it at all, that he was not built for marriage, that the focused and somewhat solitary existence he had constructed suited him perfectly and required no revision. His family disagreed loudly and regularly. He ignored them with the practiced ease of a man who had been ignoring things that didn't serve him since he was young. But sitting there that morning, reading about a woman who had built something as extraordinary as he had and lost something as devastating as she had and simply, continued, with grace, without bitterness, without diminishment, June SEO felt something shift in the architecture of his certainty. He didn't examine it too closely. He simply called Hyun and told him to draft a partnership proposal for Eleanor Beaumont's consideration. Hyun, who had never heard June SEO initiate a partnership with anyone, typed the note without a word and privately rearranged everything he thought he understood about his employer. The proposal arrived at Eleanor's hotel the same afternoon, delivered by hand, in a document folder bearing the Park Global Holdings crest, while Eleanor was on a video call with her Atlanta team reviewing 3 other acquisitions she was managing simultaneously because Eleanor Beaumont did not believe in giving any single situation her undivided attention until it had earned it. She finished the call, opened the folder, and read the proposal with the same systematic attention she gave everything. It was well constructed. More than well constructed, it was intelligent in the specific way that suggested June SEO had either written significant portions of it himself or had briefed whoever wrote it with uncommon precision. The terms were serious. The vision for the Mapo parcel aligned with hers in ways that were either coincidental or the result of someone having studied her work very carefully. She read it twice. Then she called Dana. "Tell them we're interested in a conversation," she said. "Not a commitment. A conversation." Dana paused. "You're staying in Seoul?" "For now," Eleanor said. She hung up, set the proposal on the desk, and stood at her hotel window looking out at a city she had not expected to find this interesting. Below, soul moved with the particular energy of a place that had rebuilt itself so many times it had stopped being afraid of transformation. Eleanor understood that energy. She had spent her life betting on places other people had given up on, finding value in what remained after everything superficial had been stripped away. She was not thinking about Juneseo Park. She was thinking about the city. That was what she told herself, standing at that window, as the afternoon light shifted and Seoul glittered beneath her with the absolute indifference of something that had been magnificent long before she arrived and would continue long after she left. She was thinking about the city. They met again 3 days later, not in a boardroom this time but in a smaller conference room in a building Juneseo used for quieter conversations, a room with good light and no performance to it. He brought 2 members of his team. Eleanor brought Dana and her lead attorney. They talked for 4 hours, and somewhere in the second hour the conversation stopped being a negotiation and became something closer to a genuine exchange between 2 people who had spent decades thinking about the same problems from different angles and were, with some surprise on both sides, finding the overlap significant. Juneseo watched Eleanor move through complexity the way he moved through it, directly, without decoration, cutting to the structural question beneath every surface issue with a speed that suggested the surface issues barely registered for her. She pushed back on 2 of his terms with arguments so precisely constructed that his attorney leaned over and said something quietly to him that Juneseo didn't respond to because he was already revising his position. When they broke for tea, Juneseo found himself standing beside Eleanor at the window while their respective teams gathered papers and consulted quietly behind them. "You've been to Seoul before," he said. It wasn't a question. He had read it in the report. Once. 12 years ago. Conference. Eleanor looked out at the city. It was November. Everything was gray. "It's better in May." "Everything is better in May," she said, with a faint dryness that made him want to smile. He didn't. But he wanted to. They stood there for a moment in a silence that was, unusually, comfortable, the kind of silence that exists between people who are used to rooms that quiet themselves around them and have therefore never needed to fill every pause with noise. Then Eleanor set down her tea, turned back to the room and said, "Shall we continue?" They continued. By the end of the 4th hour they had the framework of something real, not a signed agreement, but the skeleton of one, solid enough to build on. Juneseo walked Eleanor and her team to the lobby. He shook Dana's hand, nodded to the attorney, and then turned to Eleanor. "Dinner," he said. "Tomorrow evening. To discuss the remaining terms." Eleanor looked at him for just a moment, not with suspicion, not with warmth, simply with the clear-eyed assessment of someone who took the measure of everything. "Fine," she said. "Somewhere quiet." "I know a place," Juneseo said. He did. He chose Chongwon House, private dining room, extraordinary food, the kind of quiet that money purchases specifically so that important things can be said without an audience. He told himself it was a business dinner. He prepared for it the way he prepared for business, reviewing the outstanding terms, anticipating her positions, thinking through his responses. He did not examine why he changed his shirt twice before leaving. He simply noted the fact and moved on from it. Eleanor arrived exactly on time, in midnight blue, her pearls catching the low light. She sat across from him and they talked about the partnership for the first 40 minutes with complete professionalism and genuine productivity, and then the food arrived and the conversation shifted, not dramatically, not obviously, but in the way that conversations shift when 2 people who have been talking about work discover, with mild surprise, that they are also simply interested in each other. Juneseo asked about Atlanta. Eleanor asked about the early years of Park Global Holdings. He told her about a deal he had nearly lost at 32 that had taught him more than any success before or since. She told him about the neighborhood in Atlanta, about Robert's Magnolias, about the loan that kept her husband up at night while she slept soundly because she had done the work and trusted the numbers. "You were never afraid?" Juneseo asked. Eleanor considered this with genuine seriousness. "I was terrified," she said. "I just decided the terror wasn't relevant." Juneseo looked at her across the table. He picked up his glass. "Set it down. And said, with the same quietness he brought to every decision that mattered, "Marry me, Eleanor." That was how it began. Not with flowers or moonlight or any of the ordinary machinery of romance. With a dinner, a confession about terror, and a proposal delivered like a closing statement by a man who had spent 59 years deciding things and had just decided the most important one. Eleanor laughed. She said, "Not in this lifetime." She went to bed. And June Seo sat in that low light, in the silence she left behind, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that his life was about to become considerably more interesting. The partnership agreement was signed on a Friday morning, in the same quiet conference room where they had spent 4 hours finding the shape of something workable. Eleanor signed with the same pen she used for every significant document, a simple matte black fountain pen that had belonged to Robert, that she carried in the inside pocket of whatever jacket she was wearing the way other people carried photographs. She didn't explain this to anyone. It wasn't anyone's business. June Seo signed across from her. His signature was economical, no flourish, no performance. Just his name, placed with precision, meaning everything it was supposed to mean. They shook hands. Their teams applauded with the restrained enthusiasm of people who understood that something significant had just happened. Dana looked like she wanted to cry, which Eleanor acknowledged with a single raised eyebrow that communicated both affection and a clear instruction to hold it together. Afterward, June Seo's team took Eleanor's team to lunch at a restaurant 3 blocks away that June Seo had reserved without being asked, because he operated in that particular way, anticipating what was needed before it was requested and arranging it without announcement. Eleanor noticed this. She filed it away without comment. June Seo himself did not go to the lunch. He walked Eleanor to the building entrance instead, and they stood for a moment on the steps while their respective teams filtered out around them. "You'll stay in Seoul through the end of the month," he said. "The preliminary site assessments will require your input." "I'm aware of my own schedule," Eleanor said pleasantly. The corner of his mouth moved. "Almost. Of course. I'll have Hyun coordinate with Dana." Eleanor nodded. She put on her sunglasses, large, dark, devastatingly elegant, and descended the steps toward her waiting car. June Seo watched her go. He noticed the way she moved through the city the same way she moved through rooms, as though she had always been there and the surroundings had simply caught up. He went back upstairs and did not think about her for the rest of the afternoon. He thought about her for most of the rest of the afternoon. The following 2 weeks had a rhythm to them that Eleanor found, if she was honest with herself, surprisingly agreeable. Mornings were site visits, she and June Seo and their respective teams walking the Mapo parcel in the early light, talking through development frameworks, debating infrastructure priorities with the focused pleasure of 2 people who genuinely loved the work. Eleanor wore flat boots for the site visits and traded her pearls for a simple gold chain. She still looked like she owned the place. She always looked like she owned whatever place she was in. June Seo watched her read land the way other people read text, absorbing it, interpreting it, seeing in raw earth and undeveloped space the finished thing it could become. He had this ability himself. Finding it in someone else was unexpectedly disarming. Afternoons were meetings, legal teams, architects, the Korean government liaison assigned to the development project. June Seo ran these with a directness that matched Eleanor's own and an authority so complete it required no reinforcement. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. When Park June Seo spoke in a room, the room organized itself around what he said, and Eleanor, who had spent decades producing this exact effect herself, recognized it with something between professional respect and private amusement. Evenings were her own. She explored Seoul with the quiet curiosity she brought to every new city, walking neighborhoods that weren't in any guide, eating at small restaurants she found by looking for the places where ordinary people were lined up outside, calling Simone on Sunday and Marcus on Wednesday and listening to Marcus's increasingly pointed questions about when exactly she was coming home with the patient affection of a mother who knew her son better than he knew himself. "I'm working, Marcus," she said. "You're always working," he said. "I'm just saying, Atlanta exists. Your office exists. Your home exists. Thank you for that geographical update, baby. Mama. Marcus. A pause. Are you okay? I'm extraordinary, she said, which was both her standard answer and, she realized as she said it this particular evening, genuinely true. She was sleeping well. The city agreed with her in some way she hadn't anticipated. The work was stimulating. She felt, and she turned this observation over carefully before allowing it, alive in a way that was slightly different from her usual aliveness. Sharper, somehow. More present. She attributed it to the project. It was an exceptional project. June SEO began manufacturing reasons to be in Eleanor's vicinity with a subtlety that would have impressed him if he had been watching someone else do it. He extended meetings that didn't need extending. He suggested site revisits that were professionally justifiable but not strictly necessary. He appeared at the hotel restaurant one morning when Eleanor was having breakfast alone, coincidentally, in the way that a man who owns half of Seoul is never entirely coincidental about where he appears, and asked if he might join her, and Eleanor looked at him over her coffee and said, "Sit down, June SEO," in a tone that suggested she was not entirely fooled but had decided to permit it anyway. They had breakfast. They talked about the project for approximately 8 minutes and then talked about other things for an hour and 15 minutes, about cities, about the specific loneliness of being in charge of large organizations, about what it meant to build something that would outlast you, about whether legacy was something you planned or something that happened to you regardless of your plans. Robert used to say you can't architect your legacy, Eleanor said, wrapping both hands around her coffee cup. You can only build the thing and let it mean what it means to people. He sounds like someone worth listening to, June SEO said. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Not a sad quiet, a considering one, the kind that meant she was deciding what to share and how much. He was the smartest person I ever argued with, she said finally. And I argued with him constantly. Who won? Alternately, she said, and smiled, a real one, not the composed professional smile she deployed in meetings but something warmer and less curated, and June SEO looked at it and felt the shift he had been trying to categorize for 2 weeks settle into something he could finally name. He was in serious trouble. His family found out on a Thursday. June SEO had 2 older sisters, Yuna, 63, who managed the Park Family Foundation with the organizational ferocity of someone who had spent decades being underestimated, and Mireille, 61, who had married into a family whose wealth complemented the Parks and who approached her position in Korean society with the seriousness of a vocation. Both sisters adored their brother with the particular intensity of women who had watched him pour everything into his empire and nothing into his personal life and had spent years worrying about him in the specific way that love expresses itself as anxiety. They called within an hour of each other on that Thursday. June SEO let both calls go to voicemail, listened to both messages, and then called Hyun. How did they find out? Hyun, who had developed over 11 years the ability to deliver uncomfortable information without inflection, said, "There were photographs, sir. From the Mapo site visits. Someone sold them to a social column." June SEO absorbed this. Which column? Hyun named it. June SEO nodded once, said, "Handle it," and returned to the document he'd been reading. The photographs were not, by any objective measure, incriminating. They showed 2 business partners walking a development site, talking, reviewing documents. But the angle of June SEO's attention in several of the images, the way he was looking at Eleanor while she was looking at something else, told a story that a social column's readership would have no difficulty interpreting. He called his sisters back that evening. Yuna spoke first, with the rapid precision of someone who had been rehearsing. June SEO. Who is this woman? My business partner, he said. The photographs suggest. My business partner, he repeated, with a quietness that in June SEO's vocabulary functioned as a full stop. Mireille was gentler but no less direct. We're not trying to interfere. We simply want to understand. There's nothing yet to understand, June SEO said, which was the most honest thing he could have said and which his sisters, being intelligent women, heard precisely for what it was, the word yet sitting in that sentence like a small, significant flag. He hung up and stood at his penthouse window looking at the Han River, which was dark now and catching the city lights in long wavering lines across its surface. His family's concern was not irrational. He understood it. He also understood, with a clarity that surprised him with its completeness, that it was not going to change anything. Eleanor was unaware of the photographs. She was having dinner alone at a small restaurant in Mapo that she had found on her third evening walk through the district, a family-run place, 6 tables, food that arrived without ceremony and tasted like someone's grandmother had made it, which was precisely why Eleanor kept returning. She liked eating in places that had no interest in impressing her. There was a restfulness to being unknown. She was halfway through a bowl of doenjang jjigae when her phone lit up with a message from Dana. There are photos of you and Mr. Park circulating online. Korean social media. Nothing inappropriate, site visit pictures. But the commentary is colorful. Eleanor looked at the message. Then she looked at her soup. She finished the soup before responding. Forward me the links. She read the articles in her hotel room later that evening, sitting in the armchair by the window with her reading glasses on, her expression unchanged throughout. The photographs were professionally innocuous. The commentary was not cruel exactly, but pointed, laced with the specific brand of surprise that Koreans of a certain social stratum apparently felt at the idea of their most prominent billionaire spending significant time with a 70-year-old black American woman. Several comments questioned whether she was truly his business partner or some other category of companion, phrased with just enough delicacy to be insulting without being actionable. Eleanor closed the browser. Removed her glasses. Looked at the Seoul skyline for a long moment. Then she opened her laptop and did 3 hours of work, because Eleanor Jean Beaumont had been navigating other people's surprise at her existence since 1981 and had long since decided that their surprise was their problem to manage, not hers. She did not mention the photographs to Jun Seo the following morning. She arrived at the site visit on time, in her flat boots and her gold chain, and walked the land with the same focused authority she brought every morning, and if Jun Seo noticed anything different in her manner he gave no sign of it, which she appreciated. They were reviewing the northern boundary of the parcel when Jun Seo said, without looking up from the survey document in his hand, "I'm aware of the photographs." "So am I," Eleanor said, equally without looking up. A pause. "I apologize. My team should have anticipated." Jun Seo. She said his name in a way that stopped the sentence cleanly. "I've been a black woman in American business for 40 years. I don't need you to apologize for other people's opinions." She turned a page in her own document. "Now, tell me your thinking on the northern boundary setback, because I disagree with what the architect submitted and I want to hear your position before I dismantle it." Jun Seo looked at her. Then he told her his position on the northern boundary setback. She dismantled it thoughtfully and thoroughly, and he revised it, and they moved on, and the morning continued the way their mornings had been continuing, productively, and with a quality of engagement that neither of them had a fully adequate word for. The dinner invitation came that same evening. Jun Seo's message to Eleanor was characteristically direct, 7 words, "Dinner tonight. Changwon House. 7 o'clock. Please." Eleanor looked at the last word for a moment. In 11 days of working together she had not heard Jun Seo Park say please to anyone. She considered this. Then she told Dana she would be out for the evening and wore the midnight blue dress because it was the most appropriate thing she had packed for a dinner at somewhere like Changwon House and for no other reason. The food was extraordinary. The conversation moved from the project to other things with the ease that had become characteristic of their evenings together, and Eleanor found herself laughing twice, genuinely, unexpectedly, at things Jun Seo said with such perfect dryness that the humor arrived a full second after the sentence ended. He was funnier than she had initially assessed. She filed this away. She told him about Robert and the magnolias. She hadn't planned to. It simply came, naturally, without effort, the way things surface when you are sufficiently comfortable with someone and sufficiently off guard. Jun Seo listened the way he always listened, completely, without interrupting, his attention so total it had a quality almost like touch. When she finished he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he sounds like someone who understood what mattered. He did, Eleanor said. Eventually we both did. June SEO looked at her. The restaurant was very quiet around them, all low light and careful distance, the world outside held entirely at bay. "Marry me, Eleanor," he said. She heard it land. She felt, and this was new, this was different from the first time, and she noted it with the alarm of someone who has just discovered an unexpected crack in a structure they were certain was sound. She felt something move in her chest. Small. Quickly suppressed. She picked up her wine glass. She laughed. It was still genuine, still warm, but it was doing slightly more work than the first laugh had needed to do. "Not in this lifetime, June SEO," she said. He did not look wounded. He did not look surprised. He looked at her with that same complete, unhurried attention and nodded once, as though she had said something he was filing away for future reference. She went back to her hotel. She stood at her window for a long time before sleeping, looking at Seoul spread out below her, bright and indifferent and very beautiful. She was fine. She was completely fine. She did not think about the way that proposal had felt different from the first one, or about the small thing that had moved in her chest before she shut it down, or about the fact that June SEO Park had said please in a 7-word dinner invitation and she had noticed it immediately and remembered it still. She was fine. She closed the curtains and went to bed. She was fine. She told herself this again on Saturday morning when she woke at 5:30 as she always did, made herself tea from the small kettle on the hotel desk, and sat in the armchair watching Seoul come alive in the grey pre-dawn. The city woke slowly at that hour, lights appearing in windows one by one, the first delivery trucks moving through streets that were otherwise still, the Han River shifting from black to dark silver as the sky behind it began its gradual reconsideration of the dark. Eleanor had always loved this hour. Robert had been a deep sleeper, he could remain unconscious through virtually anything, which had impressed and occasionally irritated her across 41 years of marriage, and so the early mornings had always been hers alone. She had done some of her best thinking in them. Some of her most important decisions had been made before 6 in the morning, in the particular quality of silence that existed before the day had fully committed to itself. She thought about June SEO now, in that silence, with the deliberateness of someone who had been deliberately not thinking about something and had decided the avoidance was itself a form of attention and therefore counterproductive. She thought about him analytically, the way she approached everything that required honest assessment. He was 59 years old. She was 70. That 11-year gap sat in the conventional direction that society found most uncomfortable. She was older, he was younger, and the world had very fixed ideas about what that meant and what it said about both parties. Eleanor had spent her entire adult life declining to be shaped by what the world thought things meant. This did not make the gap disappear. It simply meant she was capable of looking at it without flinching. He was, by any measure, a remarkable person. She had worked alongside enough people across enough decades to assess this without sentiment. The quality of his thinking, the integrity of his decisions, the particular consistency between who he was in public and who he appeared to be when the audience was small, these were not common qualities. She respected them. She had respected very few people this quickly in her life. He had proposed twice. The first time she had laughed because it was genuinely absurd, a man she had known for 11 days, across a dinner table, with the calm certainty of someone ordering from a menu he had already memorized. The second time she had laughed because laughing was the appropriate response and because the alternative, sitting in the candlelight of Changwon House and letting herself feel the full weight of being looked at by Park Jun SEO with that particular quality of attention, was not something she was prepared to do. She was 70 years old. She had loved one man completely and buried him and rebuilt herself in the aftermath and arrived at a life that was full and meaningful and hers in a way that required no addition. She did not need this. She was not in the market for this. The heart that had moved in her chest when he said marry me the second time was simply muscle memory, the body recognizing a frequency it had once known, responding automatically, meaning nothing. Eleanor finished her tea. She set the cup down. She looked at Seoul for a long moment, steady and clear-eyed and completely fine. Then she picked up her phone and sent Dana a message, schedule confirmed for Monday. I'll need the revised boundary documents before 9. She put the phone down. She did not check to see if June SEO had messaged. He hadn't, he was not, she had learned, a man who filled silences unnecessarily, and she was not checking. She simply happened to notice, in the course of setting the phone down, that there were no new messages from him, and this observation carried no weight whatsoever. None at all. She got up, got dressed, and went out to walk the city in the early light, and Seoul received her the way it always did, without ceremony, without judgment, bright and enormous and entirely indifferent to the perfectly manageable feelings of one 70-year-old woman who was, without any question, absolutely fine. Zoe arrived on a Tuesday. Eleanor knew she was coming. Simone had called the previous week with the careful brightness she used when she had already made a decision and was presenting it as a suggestion. David has a conference in Tokyo, Mama, and Zoe's half-term lines up perfectly, so I thought we'd fly through Seoul and spend a few days. If that's all right. When have you ever needed my permission for anything, Eleanor said, which was not a question and which Simone correctly interpreted as yes. Zoe was 8 years old and had inherited, in Eleanor's considered opinion, the finest qualities of every person in the Beaumont line and assembled them into something entirely her own. She was serious without being solemn, curious without being exhausting, and possessed of a particular kind of stillness that made adults instinctively lower their voices around her, as though she might be recording everything for later analysis. She probably was. Eleanor recognized the quality because she had spent 70 years doing exactly the same thing. They arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, Simone in a camel coat, pulling 2 suitcases, looking like a more relaxed version of Eleanor at 42, and Zoe in a yellow jacket, rolling her own small purple suitcase with focused determination and taking in Seoul through the car window with the systematic attention of a scientist cataloging a new environment. It's very tall, Zoe said. Most major cities are, Eleanor said. Zoe considered this. Atlanta isn't this tall. Parts of Atlanta are tall. The parts near us aren't. That's true, Eleanor conceded. Zoe nodded, satisfied, and returned to the window. Simone caught Eleanor's eye over Zoe's head and smiled, the specific smile of a woman who found her mother and her daughter hilarious in identical ways for identical reasons and had learned to keep this observation entirely to herself. Eleanor had not planned for June SEO to meet Zoe. She had not planned for June SEO to be anywhere near the hotel that Wednesday morning when she brought Simone and Zoe to the Mapo site. She had simply miscalculated his schedule, or rather she had not consulted it, which was unusual for her and which she did not examine too closely. He was already there when they arrived. Standing at the northern boundary with Hyun and 2 architects, reviewing something on a rolled-out site plan, his back to them. He turned when he heard the cars. Eleanor watched him register the situation, her, Simone, and a small person in a yellow jacket who was already walking directly toward the edge of the site with the purposeful energy of someone who had decided the interesting things were over there. Zoe, Eleanor said. Zoe stopped. Turned. Looked at June SEO with the frank evaluative gaze she directed at everything new. June SEO looked back at her with equal seriousness. Who are you? Zoe asked. June SEO Park, he said. Who are you? Zoe Beaumont Clark, she said, with the particular gravity of someone who understood that names were important information. Eleanor is my grandmother. I know, June SEO said. Zoe processed this. Do you work with her? We work together, he said. It's different. Zoe tilted her head. How? June SEO considered this with genuine seriousness, which was exactly the right response and which Zoe registered with a slight relaxation of her shoulders, the body language of someone who has determined that the person in front of them is worth continued attention. When you work with someone, he said, you're both trying to get to the same place. When someone works for you, they're trying to get you somewhere you've already decided on. Zoe thought about this for a moment. So you're both deciding? Yes. Okay, she said, apparently satisfied, and turned to look at the land again. Why is it empty? It won't be for long, June SEO said. What's going to be there? Buildings. Homes. Places for people to live and work. Who decides what kind? We do, Junesio said, with a slight inclination of his head toward Eleanor. Zoe looked at her grandmother. Then back at Junesio. Can I see the plans? Junesio looked at Eleanor. Eleanor's expression gave him nothing, it never did, but she didn't say no, which he had learned was its own category of answer. He walked Zoe to the site plan table and unrolled the architect's drawings and spent 23 minutes explaining them to an 8-year-old with the same focused attention he brought to board presentations, answering every question she asked without simplifying or deflecting, while Eleanor and Simone stood 20 feet away and watched. Mama, Simone said quietly. Don't, Eleanor said. I'm not saying anything. You're thinking very loudly. Simone pressed her lips together. They watched Junesio crouch down to Zoe's eye level to point out something on the drawing, and Zoe leaned in with her hands clasped behind her back, a posture so precisely Eleanor's that Simone had to look away to keep from laughing. He's good with her, Simone said, because she apparently could not help herself entirely. He's good with most things, Eleanor said, with the careful neutrality of someone selecting every word individually. Simone said nothing. She was very good at saying nothing when nothing was the most useful thing to say. It was a skill she had learned entirely from her mother. That evening Simone put Zoe to bed in the hotel suite second room and then came and sat across from Eleanor in the small living area with 2 cups of tea and the expression of a woman who had been patient long enough. Tell me about him, she said. There's nothing to tell, Eleanor said. He's my business partner. The project is going well. He crouched down to show Zoe the site plans. He was being courteous. Mama. He crouched down. In a $4,000 suit. Eleanor picked up her tea. I don't know what the suit cost. I do. I looked. Simone wrapped both hands around her cup, a gesture so identical to Eleanor's own that Eleanor felt the recognition of it move through her like a small current. He looked at you, Simone said, more quietly. When you weren't looking. He looked at you the way, she stopped. The way what? Eleanor said. Simone met her mother's eyes. The way Daddy used to, she said simply. The room was very quiet for a moment. Eleanor set her cup down with great precision, aligning it exactly with the edge of the saucer, and looked at her daughter with an expression that gave nothing away and cost considerable effort to maintain. Simone. I know, Mama. I'm 70 years old. I know. He's 59. I can subtract. Your brother would lose his mind. Marcus loses his mind at moderate inconvenience, Simone said. That's not a useful metric. She leaned forward. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not even suggesting anything. I'm just, Mama, when did you last let yourself consider something? Eleanor looked at her daughter for a long moment. Simone had Robert's eyes, the same warm steadiness, the same quality of seeing things clearly without making the thing seen feel exposed. It had always undone Eleanor slightly, that particular inheritance. Go to bed, Simone, she said gently. Simone went to bed. She kissed her mother's cheek first, which Eleanor accepted with the composed stillness of someone receiving something they needed and had not asked for. Eleanor sat alone with her tea until it was cold, not thinking about anything in particular, which meant she was thinking about everything at once and had simply declined to sort it. Marcus arrived on Friday. He did not announce it. He sent a single message, landing at Incheon at 6 p.m. Don't argue, which Eleanor received while in a meeting with the government liaison in which she read twice, set her phone face down, and finished the meeting without mentioning it. She sent back, I wasn't planning to. Marcus Beaumont was 45 years old, 6'2", and had inherited Eleanor's cheekbones and Robert's temperament, which meant he felt everything with considerable intensity and expressed it with the directness of a man who had never entirely learned to separate urgency from volume. He loved his mother with a ferocity that occasionally manifested as interference and always manifested as presence. He showed up. For everything. It was simultaneously his most exhausting and most precious quality. He arrived at the hotel at 7:30, having apparently gone directly from the airport, still in his travel clothes, and hugged Eleanor in the doorway with the particular grip of someone who has been worried and is relieved to find the thing they were worried about still intact. "You're fine," he said. It was not a question. It was something he needed to say out loud. "I told you I was extraordinary," Eleanor said into his shoulder. He held on for another moment. Then he let go, looked at her, looked at Simone who was standing behind Eleanor with the careful expression of a referee who has not yet been called onto the field, and said, "Where is he?" "Good evening to you too, Marcus," Eleanor said, and stepped back to let him in. June SEO had known Marcus was coming before Eleanor told him. Hyun monitored certain things as a matter of professional habit, and a flight booking from Atlanta to Seoul under the name Marcus Robert Beaumont had appeared in the system the previous morning. June SEO had not mentioned this to Eleanor. He had simply rearranged Thursday afternoon and kept Friday morning clear. The call came at 9:15 Friday morning. Hyun put it through without comment. "Mr. Park." Marcus's voice had the controlled register of a man applying significant effort to sounding calmer than he was. "I'd like to meet with you. Today, if possible." "I have time at 11, June SEO said. A pause, brief, surprised. He had expected resistance, or conditions, or the elaborate scheduling that people use to signal their own importance. 11 works, Marcus said. "I'll send you the address," June SEO said. He hung up. Looked at the Han River through his window for a moment. Then he went back to work. Marcus arrived at 11 exactly, which told June SEO something about him immediately, not the punctuality itself but the precision of it, the way he had arrived neither early nor late, which suggested he had wanted to and had disciplined himself not to. He was a tall man who moved with the self-contained energy of someone who had learned to take up exactly the space he needed and no more. He looked like Eleanor in the architecture of his face, the same strong bone structure, the same quality of assessment in the eyes. He sat across from June SEO without preamble. "My mother is 70 years old, Marcus said. "I know," June SEO said. "She buried my father 8 years ago." "I know that too." Marcus looked at him steadily. "She doesn't need anyone, Mr. Park. She built an empire. She raised 2 children. She has a full life. She is not someone who needs to be," he paused, selecting the word carefully, pursued. June SEO was quiet for a moment. Outside, Seoul moved in its enormous and indifferent way, 50 floors below them. "You're right," he said. Marcus had clearly prepared for disagreement. The agreement landed differently. He recalibrated. "Then why?" "Because need and want are different things," June SEO said. "Your mother doesn't need anyone. She has made that entirely clear, and I respect it completely. But I am not here because I think she needs me." He looked at Marcus directly, with the same quality of attention he brought to everything that mattered. "I'm here because I have met very few people in my life who are worth pursuing, and your mother is one of them. That assessment is not going to change because it's inconvenient." Marcus stared at him. The room was very quiet. "If you hurt her," Marcus said, low and controlled. "Then there is nowhere I could go," June SEO said simply, "that would be far enough." Marcus looked at him for a long moment, the evaluative, structural look of someone taking the full measure of a thing and deciding what it was actually made of. June SEO held it without performance or discomfort. He had nothing to hide and no interest in pretending otherwise. Marcus stood. Extended his hand. June SEO stood and shook it, firm, brief, meaning everything it was supposed to mean. "She's stubborn," Marcus said, at the door. "I've noticed," June SEO said. "She'll make you work for it." "I know." Marcus looked back at him once more. Something shifted in his expression, not warmth exactly, not yet, but the first structural adjustment that might eventually become it. Then he left, and June SEO stood in his office for a long moment in the particular quiet that follows something significant, looking at the city that answered to his name, thinking about a woman 11 years his senior who laughed when he proposed and closed doors in his face and walked through Seoul like she had always owned it and was, without any question, the most extraordinary person he had encountered in 59 years of living. He went back to work. He was going to need patience. He had always been exceptionally good at patience. Eleanor found out about the meeting from Zoe. Not because anyone told Zoe. Not because Zoe overheard anything. Simply because Zoe, who had the observational precision of a seasoned investigator in the body of an 8-year-old, noticed that her uncle Marcus came back from wherever he had gone on Friday morning looking like a man who had gone out expecting a fight and returned having had a conversation instead, and she mentioned this to Eleanor with the casual accuracy of someone reporting the weather. "Uncle Marcus looks different," Zoe said, at lunch. "Like he figured something out." Eleanor looked at Marcus across the table. Marcus looked at his food with the studied concentration of someone who had decided the safest place to direct his attention was his bibimbap. "Marcus," Eleanor said. "The food here is really something," Marcus said. "Simone, have you tried this?" "Marcus Robert Beaumont," Eleanor said. Marcus set down his chopsticks. Looked at his mother. And had the grace, at least, to look slightly sheepish. "I just wanted to meet him," he said. "That's all." Eleanor held his gaze for a long, deliberate moment. Then she picked up her own chopsticks and returned to her food without another word, which Marcus correctly understood to be a consequence he would be feeling for some time. Zoe watched all of this with great interest and said nothing, storing everything carefully away in whatever internal archive she had been building since birth, patient and thorough and, in this respect at least, exactly like her grandmother. The smear campaign began on a Monday. Eleanor found out the way she found out most things she wasn't meant to find out, early, thoroughly, and before anyone had prepared a way to soften it. She was at her hotel desk at 6:15 in the morning, working through emails with her second cup of coffee, when Dana's message arrived with a string of links and a single line of text that Dana, who chose her words with professional care, had apparently not been able to dress up no matter how she tried. "You need to see these." "I'm sorry." Eleanor opened the first link. The articles had appeared overnight across 3 of Seoul's most widely read digital publications, the kind of outlets that understood exactly where the line between journalism and damage sat and had made a considered business decision to operate just on the permissible side of it. The language was careful. It was also precise in its cruelty, the way that careful language often is when cruelty is the actual intention and plausible deniability is the preferred armor. The first piece questioned the nature of the Mapo partnership, suggesting, without stating, that a company of Beaumont real estate size had no legitimate strategic reason to be operating in Seoul and that the partnership with Park Global Holdings raised questions about Park Jun-seo's professional judgment that the business community deserved to examine. It quoted 2 anonymous sources described as people familiar with Park Global Holdings' internal culture who expressed concern about recent decisions at the leadership level. It did not name Eleanor directly in the first 3 paragraphs. By the 4th paragraph it had included her photograph. The second piece was less restrained. It focused on Eleanor herself, her age, her nationality, the 11-year gap, the photographs from the site visits that had circulated weeks earlier and had now been resurfaced with new framing. It described her as an unlikely presence in Seoul's elite business circles. It used the word elderly once, in a subordinate clause, with the practiced innocence of a word placed where it would land hardest while remaining technically defensible. It quoted a cultural commentator who spoke about the importance of appropriate partnerships in Korean business culture with an emphasis on appropriate that required no interpretation. The third piece was the shortest and the worst. It didn't bother with the business angle at all. It was a social column, 3 paragraphs, a photograph, and a headline that translated roughly to, "Korea's most eligible billionaire and the American grandmother, what is Park Jun-seo thinking?" Eleanor read all 3. She read them the way she read everything, completely, without skimming, giving the material her full attention so that she understood exactly what she was dealing with before she decided how to deal with it. She closed each tab when she was finished. She set her phone face down on the desk. She looked at the wall for approximately 45 seconds. Then she opened her laptop and sent Dana a reply, "Thank you." Hold all my calls until 9. I need 2 hours. She spent those 2 hours doing what she always did when something required clear thinking. She worked. Not on anything related to the situation, not on anything that required emotional processing. She worked on the quarterly projections for Beaumont's Chicago portfolio, which required the kind of focused numerical attention that left no space in the mind for anything else, and she worked with complete concentration for 2 full hours until her thinking was clean and her chest was quiet and she could look at the situation with the dispassion it deserved. At 8:15 she stood, dressed, put on her pearls, and called Simone. "I saw," Simone said immediately. Her voice had the particular controlled steadiness of someone who had been awake for a while managing their own reaction so they could be useful to someone else. Eleanor recognized the quality. It was exactly what she herself did. She had apparently taught it without meaning to. "I'm fine," Eleanor said. "I know you are," Simone said. "What do you need?" "Nothing. I'm going to the site. I have work." A pause. "Mama." "I'm fine, Simone," Eleanor said again, with the gentle finality that meant the topic was being set aside, not because it didn't matter but because mattering and dwelling were not the same thing and Eleanor had never confused them. She hung up. Put on her jacket. Looked at herself in the mirror for a moment, 70 years old, back straight, pearls at her throat, face arranged in the composed and entirely impenetrable expression that had served her across 4 decades of rooms that had underestimated her, and went to work. June SEO found out at 6:45. Hyun delivered the information with the careful precision of someone who understood that the next several minutes would determine the temperature of the entire day and possibly the week. He laid the printed articles on June SEO's desk. June SEO had standing instructions that anything requiring his immediate attention arrived on paper, and stood at the appropriate distance. June SEO read them. All 3. His expression did not change during the reading. It rarely did. But Hyun, who had spent 11 years learning to read the things that didn't change in his employer's expression, watched something move through June SEO's eyes during the 3rd article that he had not seen there before, not anger exactly, though anger was present and noted. Something older and more structural than anger. Something that had made decisions before the mind caught up. June SEO set the 3rd article down. "Who?" he said. Hyun had anticipated this. He had spent the previous hour preparing for it. The sourcing traces back through 2 intermediaries to a communications consultant retained by 3 members of the Park Global Holdings board. The consultant also has a documented relationship with your sister Mireille's husband's family office. The room was very quiet. All 3 board members, June SEO said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir." June SEO stood. He walked to the window. He stood there for a long time, looking at Seoul in the early morning light, and Hyun stood very still behind him and waited, because this was one of the moments that defined the shape of what came next and required no interference. When June SEO turned around, his voice was the same as it always was, quiet, unhurried, carrying the particular authority of someone who has never needed volume to make a point land. "I want an emergency board meeting. 9 o'clock. All members present." He paused. "And call my sister." Eleanor was at the Mapo site by 8:30. She walked the northern boundary alone. Her team hadn't arrived yet, the architects weren't due until 10, just her and the empty land and the Seoul morning, cool and clear, the city spread out around the parcel like a frame around something that didn't yet know what it was going to become. She did this sometimes, arrived early, before the day's structure descended, and just stood in a place and let it speak to her in the way that land spoke when you gave it sufficient silence. Robert had called it listening with your feet. He had meant it literally, the way ground felt different under you depending on what it was and what it wanted to be, the density of it, the grade, the way it held water or didn't. Eleanor had always thought he was being poetic. After 30 years of doing it herself, she understood he had been being precise. She stood at the northern boundary and looked at the 43 acres before her and thought about what they would become, the buildings, the homes, the community framework she intended to build around the development, the way value worked when you thought about it correctly, not as extraction but as addition, giving a place more than you took from it and watching what grew. She had been doing this for 40 years. Across 17 neighborhoods. Across 3 decades of expansion and 2 recessions and 1 devastating personal loss that had, temporarily, made the work feel like the only solid thing remaining. It had held her. The work had always held her. It was holding her now. She heard the car before she saw it, the specific sound of a vehicle moving with purpose across the unpaved access road that ran along the site's eastern edge. She didn't turn around immediately. She finished the thought she was having about the northern boundary setback. She had revised her position twice already and had arrived at something she felt was finally correct, and then she turned. June SEO was walking toward her across the site. He had come from the board meeting. She didn't know this yet, but she would, and he was in a dark suit and no tie, which was unusual, and his face had the particular quality it got when he had done something that required the full weight of his authority and had not flinched from it. He stopped a few feet from her. They looked at each other in the morning light, the empty land around them, soul indifferent and enormous in every direction. "I know about the articles," Eleanor said, before he could speak. "I know you do," he said. "I want you to know that I am not." Eleanor. He said her name the way she sometimes said his, as a complete sentence, carrying everything that needed to be said without requiring any of the words. She stopped. He looked at her directly. 3 members of my board orchestrated it. 2 of them have been with Park Global Holdings for over a decade. I removed all 3 this morning. Eleanor was very still. June SEO. I also spoke to my family, he said. Specifically the branch of it that provided the initial connection to the consultant. His voice was even. It was the evenness of something that had been through considerable heat and had not bent. I want to be clear about something. What those articles said, about your age, your background, your presence here, I need you to know that there is not one word of it that reflects anything I believe or anything I will tolerate in proximity to my name or yours. The site was very quiet around them. Somewhere in the distance Seoul made its enormous noise, but here there was only the wind moving across the open land and the particular silence of 2 people standing in it. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. She was not a woman who was easily moved. She had learned early that composure was not coldness, that containing something was not the same as not feeling it, and that the most important things were often best received in stillness rather than reaction. But something was moving in her now and she was not, for once, immediately reaching to contain it. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, June SEO said simply. I did. She looked at him. He looked at her. The morning light was clean and direct between them. I was going to leave, she said. She said it without drama, simply as information, because she had decided some time ago that honesty was the only currency worth spending with this man. When I read the articles this morning, my first instinct was to pack and go home and let the whole thing, the project, the partnership, all of it, let it go, because I have never in 40 years allowed a situation to cost me more than it was worth, and I applied that calculation to this and I was ready to leave. June SEO was quiet, listening. I didn't leave, she said. I know, he said. You're here. I'm here, she confirmed. She looked at the land around them. I'm here because this project matters and because walking away from something because other people are uncomfortable has never been how I operate, and I was not going to start at 70. She paused. Not for them. The last 2 words sat in the air between them with the particular weight of something that had a second meaning Eleanor was not quite acknowledging and June SEO was not quite pressing. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small flat box, not jewelry, nothing like that, simply a box, and held it out to her. She took it, looked at him once, then opened it. Inside was a key. A single key, plain and unadorned, on a simple ring. She looked at it. Then at him. The Mapo site office, he said. Your own access. Independent of my team, independent of the schedule, available whenever you want it. He paused. I had it made last week. Before this morning. He looked at her steadily. I want you to have things that are yours in this city, Eleanor. Not borrowed. Not contingent. Yours. Eleanor closed the box. She held it in both hands for a moment. Looked at the land. Then she looked at June SEO, and something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, not in the way that would make a good scene in a film, but in the quiet irreversible way that real things shift when they finally move. A door not thrown open but unlocked. The difference between a wall and a threshold. June SEO, she said. Yes. Don't propose again today. He almost smiled. I wasn't going to. Good, she said. She put the box in her jacket pocket, turned back to the land, and said, Come look at this northern boundary with me. I've revised my position and I want your thoughts. He came and stood beside her and looked at where she was pointing and said what he thought, and she told him where she agreed and where she didn't, and the morning moved forward the way mornings do, steadily, without announcement, and if they stood slightly closer to each other than they strictly needed to for the purpose of reviewing a boundary line, neither of them mentioned it. The land held them both in its silence and waited, with the patience of things that have existed long enough to understand that the most important developments are rarely the ones that announce themselves. That evening Eleanor sat in her hotel room and did not call Marcus and did not call Simone and did not call anyone. She sat in her chair by the window with a small flat box in her hand and the Seoul skyline before her, and she thought about Robert, not with grief, not with the particular ache that his absence still occasionally produced, but with the quiet intimacy of someone consulting a person they loved about something important. She thought about what he would say. She knew, with the certainty of 41 years of marriage, exactly what he would say. He would say something dry and precise that landed like a joke and meant everything. He would say it once and then change the subject because Robert had always understood that the most important things didn't need repeating. She thought she could almost hear it. She closed her hand around the box, looked at Seoul glittering endlessly beyond the glass, and sat with it all, the morning, the land, the articles, the board members June SEO had removed without hesitation, the key, the way he had stood beside her at the boundary line, sat with all of it without sorting it, without resolving it, without reaching for the composure that usually arrived automatically. She let it be complicated. For the first time in a long time she simply let something be complicated and stayed in the room with it and did not move toward the door. Outside, Seoul burned bright and did not care. Inside, Eleanor Jean Beaumont sat in her chair and felt, beneath the complexity and the history and the considerable weight of 70 years of knowing exactly who she was, something quiet and new and entirely inconvenient beginning, not with drama, not with declaration, but with the slow and undeniable certainty of a foundation being laid in ground that had been waiting, without knowing it was waiting, for a very long time. She sat there until midnight. Then she went to bed. She slept better than she had in 8 years. She woke at 5:30 as always, but something was different in the quality of the morning, not the light, which was the same gray pre-dawn Seoul had been offering her every day, and not the city, which was indifferent as always. Something in her. A settledness she hadn't carried into a morning in a long time. Not peace exactly. The situation was still complicated and her feelings about it were still not fully sorted, and she was still 70 years old and he was still 59 and Marcus was still Marcus, and none of the structural facts had changed overnight. But she had slept. Genuinely, deeply, without the low-level vigilance that had accompanied her sleep for most of the past 8 years, the part of her that stayed half-alert even in rest, monitoring, managing, making sure everything was in its place. That part had been quiet last night. She didn't know what that meant. She was fairly certain she knew what it meant and had decided not to examine it before coffee. She made tea, sat in her chair, and looked at Seoul waking up below her, the delivery trucks, the first lights in office windows, the Han River going through its daily transformation from black to silver to blue as the sky changed its mind about the dark. She had the small flat box on the table beside her. She hadn't put it away last night and she didn't put it away now. She thought about the key inside it. The specificity of it, not a grand gesture, not flowers or jewelry or any of the conventional vocabulary of pursuit. A key to a site office. Her own access. Independent of his schedule. I want you to have things that are yours in this city. He had said it with the same evenness he brought to everything, no performance in it, and that absence of performance was somehow the most disarming thing of all. She had spent 40 years building things. She understood, better than most, the difference between a person who wanted to impress you and a person who wanted to give you something real. Impression was about the giver. Real things were about the receiver. June Seo Park had never once, in all their weeks together, done anything that was about himself. She picked up her phone. Not to call anyone. Simply to look at it for a moment, the way you look at something when you're deciding whether to do a thing and the deciding is almost finished. She set it back down without calling anyone. She finished her tea. She got dressed. She put on her pearls, picked up the small flat box, and put it in her jacket pocket where it sat like ballast, solid and specific and hers. Then she went to the Mapo site, 2 hours before she needed to be there, and let herself in with the key. The site office was small and functional, a temporary structure, good light, a desk, 2 chairs, survey maps pinned to one wall and a window that looked out over the full 43 acres of empty land that was about to become something neither of them could yet fully see but both of them could feel. She stood at that window for a long time. The city beyond the site was beginning its morning in earnest now, the sounds of it reaching her through the glass, distant, layered, the particular music of a place that had never needed her permission to be magnificent. She thought, I am 70 years old and I am standing in a room that a man gave me a key to and I am not afraid and I am not sure when that happened. She thought, Robert. And then, quietly, without drama, without tears, without any of the ceremony she might have expected from a moment this significant, she thought, yes. Okay. Yes. Not to June Seo. Not yet. That conversation had its own timing and she would not rush it. But to herself, to the part of herself that had been standing at a door for 8 years and had finally, in a site office in Seoul at 6 in the morning, decided that doors were made to be walked through. She stood at the window until the sun was fully up and the land was gold in the morning light and Seoul was entirely, irreversibly awake. Then she sat at the desk, opened her laptop, and went to work. Marcus called on a Thursday morning, 11 days after he had flown back to Atlanta with the particular quietness of a man who had gone to Seoul expecting confrontation and returned having had something closer to a reckoning. Eleanor was in the site office, her site office, she had begun thinking of it that way without noticing the shift, reviewing revised architectural submissions with Dana when her phone lit up with her son's name. She excused herself, stepped outside into the Seoul morning, and answered. Mama. His voice was different. Not the controlled urgency he usually brought to calls about this subject. Something quieter. Something that had been thought about carefully before being said. Marcus, she said. A pause. Simone showed me something. Eleanor waited. Photographs, he said. Not the ones from the newspapers. Her photographs. From when she and Zoe were in Seoul. Another pause, longer this time. Mama, you look, he stopped. Started again. When is the last time you looked like that in a photograph? Eleanor was quiet for a moment, standing in the early light with Seoul spread out around her and the 43 acres of land behind her and the weight of her son's voice in her ear. Like what, she said, though she suspected she knew. Like yourself, Marcus said. Like before. He cleared his throat. I don't mean before Daddy. I mean, like you. Like the full version of you. The one that isn't just holding everything together. Eleanor looked at the horizon for a long moment. A delivery truck moved along the road at the site's edge. A bird crossed the sky above the empty land with the complete indifference of a creature that had no opinion about human complications. Baby, she said. I know, Marcus said. I know, Mama. I'm just, he exhaled. I'm sorry I came to Seoul and made it about me. About my worry. Like you needed protecting from something you'd already decided about. A beat. You never need protecting. I know that. I've always known that. His voice did the thing it sometimes did, the thing that reminded Eleanor with complete and sudden force that he was hers, that she had held him when he was 4 days old and frightened by the size of everything. "I just miss Daddy," he said. "And I don't want you to be lonely." And I didn't know how to say that without turning it into something else. Eleanor pressed her free hand flat against the wall of the site office beside her. The surface was cool and solid under her palm. "Marcus Robert Beaumont," she said, very quietly. "I know exactly why you came. And I love you for it. Every difficult, exhausting, interfering bit of it." She heard him exhale again, a longer breath this time, the kind that releases something that has been held for a while. "Is he good to you?" Marcus asked. Simple and direct, the way the most important questions always are. "Yes," Eleanor said, without hesitation, and the lack of hesitation told her something she had known for a while and had simply not yet said aloud. "Okay," Marcus said. Another pause. Tell him what I said." "In his office. That if he hurts you." "I'll tell him," Eleanor said. "And Mama?" "Yes. Stop being stubborn." He said it with the specific combination of exasperation and love that had characterized their relationship since he was 17 years old and she had refused to let him drop calculus. "Please. For once in your life." Eleanor smiled. It was a private smile, the kind that belonged to moments nobody else was present for. "I'll take it under advisement," she said. "That means no," Marcus said. "It means I heard you," she said. "Good night, baby. Or good morning. Whichever it is where you are. It's 11 at night. Go to bed." "You too, Mama." She hung up. Stood in the soul morning for a moment longer, her hand still flat against the wall, her son's voice still in her ear. The city moved around her with its usual magnificent indifference. The land behind her waited with its usual patience. She went back inside and finished reviewing the architectural submissions. But something had shifted. Something that had been almost decided had become decided. The word yes that she had said to herself in this same room 11 days ago had stopped being a private thing and had become something that required an address, a recipient, a conversation she was now ready to have. She was not afraid. June SEO did not propose again. He had meant it when he said he was done asking, and he was a man who meant what he said with a consistency Eleanor had come to rely on the way she relied on good foundations, not dramatically, simply as something you built from. He showed up. Every day he showed up, at the site, at meetings, occasionally at her hotel restaurant in the mornings in the way that had never been coincidental and that both of them had stopped pretending was anything other than what it was. He brought coffee the third time without asking how she took it, because he had watched and remembered, and Eleanor had accepted it without comment and drunk it and noted, privately, that it was exactly right. He told her things. Not personal disclosures deployed strategically to create intimacy, but real things, observations about the city, about the project, about deals he had made 30 years ago that had taught him something he still used. He told her about his father, who had built the first iteration of Park Global Holdings from a single commercial property in Busan and had died before he saw what it became. He told her this the way she had told him about Robert, not as a performance of vulnerability but as a simple true thing, offered without condition. She told him things in return. About Birmingham. About Howard. About the particular terror of that first Atlanta purchase and the particular quality of certainty that had existed inside the terror, the two things together producing something that functioned like courage without being exactly courage. He listened the way he always listened and asked the one question that went further than the story she had told, and she answered it, and they moved on, and something between them continued to build with the steadiness of something that was not in a hurry because it understood it was going to last. Zoe called him Mr. Park in a series of voice messages she sent through Simone's phone from London. She had apparently decided to maintain the correspondence independently of whatever the adults were doing, which Eleanor found hilarious and unsurprising in equal measure. The messages were serious and informational. She had read about the Mapo district online, she had questions about the soil composition, she wanted to know what the buildings would look like, she had drawn a picture of what she thought they should look like and would he like her to send it. June SEO replied to every message with the same complete attention he gave everything, answered the soil composition question accurately and at appropriate length for an 8-year-old who was clearly not interested in being condescended to, and told her he would very much like to see the drawing. Eleanor watched this correspondence develop from a distance and felt something in her chest that was warm and specific and had a shape she recognized. She was done pretending she didn't recognize it. It was a Saturday morning when she went to his penthouse. She had not called ahead. She had not planned it, exactly, or rather she had been planning it for several days in the way that things are planned when you have made a decision and are simply waiting for the right morning to arrive, and this was the right morning. She knew it the way she knew land, by feel, by something that wasn't quite logic but was built entirely from accumulated information processed below the level of conscious thought. She took a car to his building. She told the driver to wait. She went up. Hyun was not there. It was Saturday, early, and even Hyun had mornings. A member of building staff she hadn't seen before opened the penthouse level at her name, without surprise, which meant June SEO had arranged for this at some point without telling her, which meant he had been expecting this visit in general if not specifically, which meant he knew her better than she had entirely accounted for. She found him at the small table by the window, the one that looked over the Han River. He was reading, a physical document, of course, because June SEO did not trust important things to screens, and there were 2 cups on the table. One in front of him. One across from him, still steaming. She stopped. He looked up. She looked at the second cup. "Did you know I was coming?" she said. It was not quite an accusation and not quite a question. "No," he said. "I have 2 cups every morning. In case." He said it with the perfect evenness that she had learned to translate. It was not a performance of nonchalance, it was something more serious than that. It was the quiet declaration of a man who had arranged his mornings around the possibility of her, every morning, without pressure, without demand. Simply holding the space. Eleanor stood in the doorway of his penthouse looking at him in the morning light with the Han River silver and wide behind him and the second cup of coffee steaming on the table and 59 years of a man who had never once in all their time together tried to make her smaller, and she felt the last thing that had been standing move out of the way. She crossed the room. She sat down across from him. She picked up the second cup and held it the way she always held her coffee, both hands, as though it were something worth holding carefully. She looked at him. "I'm not changing my last name," she said. The room was very still. Outside, the Han River moved in its enormous and ancient way, carrying the morning light south toward the sea. June SEO looked at her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in that first boardroom, completely, without performance, taking the full measure of something he had already decided was worth his complete attention. "I know," he said. "I'm not moving to Seoul permanently. Atlanta is my home. We'll work something out, but I am not giving up my home." "I know," he said. "Marcus is going to be difficult about this for at least 6 months. Longer," June SEO said. "I'd estimate 18. Eleanor almost smiled. "And your sisters?" "Yuna will come around within the month," June SEO said. "Mireille will take longer. Her husband's family will be unhappy indefinitely." He paused. "I don't particularly care about any of that." "I know you don't," Eleanor said. She looked at him steadily. "I do. Not enough to change anything. But I want us to be honest about what this looks like from the outside and what it will cost, because I have never made a significant decision without understanding its full cost, and I am not going to start now." "Understood," June SEO said. He meant it. She could tell, the way she could always tell with him, because he did not say things he didn't mean and did not mean things he didn't say, and this consistency was something she had come to value above almost everything else he was. She looked at her coffee. Then at the river. Then at him. "June SEO. Yes. You said you were done asking." A pause. "I am." "Good," she said. "Because I'm not answering a question." She held his gaze. "I'm making a statement. I'm making it once, clearly, so there's no ambiguity." She set her coffee cup down. folded her hands on the table, looked at him with the full and unguarded attention that she had been rationing for months and was now giving completely, without reservation, without the composed professional smile or the careful composure or any of the armor she had spent 70 years constructing and that had served her well and that she was, in this moment, setting down. "I choose this," she said. "I choose you. Not because I need you, I have been very clear about that and it remains true. But because you are worth choosing, and because I am 70 years old and I have earned the right to want something for no reason other than that I want it." She paused. "And because Robert would have liked you. He would never have admitted it. But he would have liked you." June SEO was very still for a moment. The river moved behind him. The morning light shifted slightly, the way morning light does when the day is fully committing to itself. Then he reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, not grasping, not dramatic. Simply there. Warm and certain and without any of the performance that the moment might have invited. "I know about the magnolias," he said quietly. "In your driveway in Atlanta." Eleanor looked at him. "Robert planted them," June SEO said. "You told me. The most honest tree." He looked at her steadily. "I want to plant something too. Whatever you'll allow. Something that stays." Eleanor looked down at his hand over hers. She thought about 43 acres of empty land waiting to become something. She thought about a key in her jacket pocket and 2 cups on a table and a man who had rearranged his mornings around the possibility of her without ever once making it her obligation. She thought about Zoe's serious voice asking questions about soil composition. She thought about Marcus saying stop being stubborn, and Simone not saying anything at all, just smiling in that way she had. She thought about Birmingham and Howard and Atlanta and every neighborhood she had ever bet on and been right about. She thought about Robert, and the magnolias, and the way he had said some things only once because he understood the most important things didn't need repeating. She turned her hand over under June SEO's and held it properly. Looked at him. "Fine," she said. It was the same word she had used the day she told him she was keeping her last name. The same word, but landing entirely differently, not a concession, not a capitulation. A door opened by someone who had decided, with full knowledge and complete authority, that what was on the other side was worth walking toward. June SEO's hand tightened slightly over hers. Just slightly. Just enough. Outside, Seoul went about its enormous and indifferent business. The Han River carried the morning light south. In the Mapo district, 43 acres of land waited in the autumn quiet to become what 2 people had already decided it would be, something built carefully, something built well, something designed from the beginning to give more than it took and to last considerably longer than anyone expected. Inside the penthouse, Eleanor Jean Beaumont sat across from Park June SEO and drank her coffee in the morning light and did not feel afraid and did not feel alone and did not feel anything other than the particular and specific satisfaction of a woman who has spent 70 years making excellent decisions and has just made another one. She was not going to say she told them so. But she had known, standing at that northern boundary in the early light with 43 acres before her and a key in her pocket and a man beside her who had crouched down in a $4,000 suit to show an 8-year-old a site plan, she had known then. She had simply needed to finish deciding. She was finished now. If you have been watching from the beginning, from the very first moment Seoul started whispering about a 70-year-old black American grandmother who laughed in Korea's richest billionaire's face and said not in this lifetime, then you already know that Eleanor Jean Beaumont was never going to be tamed. Not by circumstance, not by other people's opinions, not by age, not by grief, not by anything the world placed in her path. She was, and would remain, entirely her own. But she was also, and this is the part the whispers never got right, the part that required knowing her rather than simply watching her, a woman who understood that choosing someone was not the same as surrendering to them. That love, real love, the kind built from mutual recognition and genuine respect and the particular intimacy of 2 people who have both built extraordinary things and understand what that costs, that kind of love did not diminish you. It was just another excellent investment. The kind you made when you had done the work, read the land, understood the numbers, and decided the return was worth every risk. Eleanor had always known how to read land. She had never once, in 40 years, been wrong about what it was going to become. This was Afro-Korean Love Tales. If this story moved you, if Eleanor and June SEO made you feel something real, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. There are more stories waiting, more women who refuse to be underestimated, more love that arrives when it is least expected and most deserved, more proof that the most extraordinary chapters do not always begin when you are young. Sometimes they begin at 70, in a boardroom in Seoul, when you look across a table at someone who is looking back at you like you are the most valuable thing in the room. And you are. You always were. Subscribe. We will see you in the next story.
Hello family, this is Afro-Korean Love Tales. We want to express our profound gratitude for staying true, for watching till the end, and for your constant engagement. Please kindly share this video to a wider audience. Let others also enjoy this wonderful story. You never can tell who is in need of this particular story to uplift his or her self-worth. So please kindly share this to a wider audience. We love you. Thank you for watching from beginning to the end. Thank you for watching till this particular time. We love you and we hope to bring beautiful stories like this. Thank you, thank you, thank you.